Greetings everyone, Rejnols here, back with what might be the final 10th edition video thing before 10th edition is out. I'm not sure. I don't really have any more planned content. I'll probably come up with something, but for now, we are taking a look at the tier list for 10th edition previews. Now, I've already gone ahead and made the tier list, because I was actually filming a video where I put them each into different tiers and talked about why I put them there and blah blah blah. And by the time I placed 5 of them, already like 30 minutes went by, so I'm gonna go ahead and make it a bit different. Here is my tier list. I might change it up just a little bit as we talk through it, but in general, I think this is where the different factions will be placed. Please, 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 please keep in mind, we know almost nothing. Yes, we have detachment rules and army rules, but we've seen like 2 or 3 units from each faction. There are so many things we don't know, and so this is purely based on the preview and therefore mostly placed because of their army ability or their detachment ability. Because we just know way too little to know how it'll interact with different characters or just units in general, so that's why it looks like this. I will talk through each of them just real quick and say why I've placed them where I have. And we will just start at the bottom. As you can see, there are 2 factions in the E tier. None of them are in the F tier. Because the F tier is kind of like, holy shit, you're so useless, it's not even worth playing the army. In the E tier, we have Necrons and Death Guard. Let's start with Death Guard. Death Guard only lost things from what we've seen so far. They didn't really gain anything new. They got sticky objectives. That's good. That's about it, really. We need to see more characters, which Death Guard has like a bajillion of, to know what the faction can really do with the contagion range. But for now, contagion is just kind of like, yeah, you're inside the contagion and you get a small debuff and that's about it. Their Terminators went down to 4-inch move. Yes, they are toughness 6 and a 4-up invul now, but it's still like, eh. And much of that is the same reason why Necrons are in the E tier. Necrons also have a boatload of characters. But their army rule is just resurrect some models and get +1 to hit if there's a character in your unit. And that's not bad. It's just not something very good when you look at it on the paper alone without knowing what all the other things are doing. So that is why both Necrons and Death Guard are in the E tier. One thing I should mention right now is that I didn't take too much time taking into account like which faction is above which within individual categories. So like I put Necrons in front of Death Guard. Doesn't necessarily mean I think Necrons are better than Death Guard in the E tier. And the same goes for all the other tiers. I kind of just placed them into the tiers and was like, I think this is where this faction goes for now. But yes, it's gonna be super inaccurate, and I think it'll be fun coming back to look at this video and be like, oh boy, was I wrong about that one, and oh boy, was I wrong about that one, but hey, look, I placed this one correctly, kinda, which is why I'm making this video. Because it's fun to discuss, and I want to also hear from you guys, so be sure to leave me your thoughts on any one or multiple of the factions. Or you can join the Discord, which I have created. It's still a work in progress, but there is a Discord, so you can click the link in the description and it'll take you to it, and then you can share your own tier list with me, and we can talk about it there. It'll be fun. That's the whole point. Warhammer is fun. Anyways, moving on, we have the Adeptus Mechanicus, also known as the AdMech. I've placed them in D tier because while I don't think their rules are bad, I think it's really cool the whole thing about bombarding the enemy's deployment zone. And then it becomes like a radioactive wasteland and you can take some mortals if you stay there. It'll be a real good way to take care of something like, let's say, cultists, which are just holding an objective or just, you know, taking some wounds off of some units early on to help you easier kill them later on. And then there's the, if you choose the Protector Imperative, you get +1 against, well, +1 to your armor save. Well, not +1 to your armor save. Reduce AP by 1 is what I believe it is. Or you can get the +1 AP, I forget what the other one is. But you have the defensive one and you have the offensive one. Whereas like, if you're in your deployment zone, you get this. And if you're outside of your deployment zone, you get that. It seems fine, but it's not something I would rate too highly before we see more units, because we don't really know how much it'll impact it. So while I think the bombardment is really good, I'm not sold on the defense-offensive thing, which is why I placed them in D tier. I'm gonna keep interjecting between talking about all of these to think of things and say things. From the previews, I think GW has done an amazing job at selling the fluffy or lore-wise why those factions would have those abilities. And sometimes that means that some factions get an ability that's not as good as others. based purely on an ability against ability kind of situation. But in general, I think anyone playing any of these factions can look at them and be like, yeah, I see why my guys do this thing. It makes sense. Then whether or not it's good is, you know, a whole different thing. Alright, that was the D tier. Moving up into the C tier, here is where I've placed most factions. And the C tier is kind of where I place things where I'm like, this will be fine for sure, but it could probably be better, or it could potentially be worse. We have the Thousand Sons. We saw their different capitalist rituals, whatever. Cabal rituals, that's the word I was looking for. It was like capitalistic rituals. And some of them look really good. Turn off armor saves is going to be really good against, say, I don't know, Imperial Guards, which have 5-up saves. And now if you shoot a bolter at them, they just die. You have the Doom Bolt, which is like D6 plus 3 mortals if you roll high enough on the dice. Some of them are really powerful, and then some of them are kind of like, you know, oh, you can spend 2 and then you can reroll 1 save roll. Still good, it's a free command point reroll on the save roll specifically. But how many points they'll get to use these rituals, and how many units they'll have that can take proper advantage of it, that's still something that's up in the air, because again, we haven't seen that many units. And in general, that's just my thought process about the C tier, is that they have a decent, but maybe not amazing army ability / detachment rule that can potentially be lifted up even further, depending on the units, or it might even be worse if, again, the units don't do anything with the rules. The Astra Militarum have orders. These have been significantly nerfed from 9th edition, but that's probably a good thing, because they were pretty damn good in 9th edition. Stuff like getting +1 to hit in melee, or getting +1 to hit in shooting is what they have in 10th, whereas in 9th edition it would be like +1 to hit, but also +1 AP, or like advance +3 inches, and also you can shoot. It was really powerful. They are much more like grounded and simple now, and not as overpowered while still being good. Then we have the demons with the not Shadow in the Warp, that's Tyranids. The Shadows of Chaos? Chaos Shadow? They put out like a field on the board, depending on how many objectives you control and your characters. For example, Be'lakor, everything within 6 inches of him counts as being inside the Shadow of Chaos. That's super fluffy, and I can see some of the exalted demons, you know, not the greater demons, but the smaller demons that are like named or like specific, have some abilities where it's like, if this unit is if this character is leading a unit, you automatically advance 6, and then if you're inside the Shadow of Chaos, you can advance and charge with this unit. I think there's a lot of potential for some Chaos Demons shenanigans there. Could also be like the corn guy, the Skull Taker, is that his name? I think Skull Taker. It could be something like, if you're inside the Shadow of Chaos, then the opponent doesn't get to take saving throws against this guy's attacks. Drukhari is the one where I'm like, should this have been B tier actually instead of C tier, but they've lost quite a bit. They don't get advance and charge anymore. We saw the Venom went from a 5-up invuln to a 6-up invuln. And they don't get the benefit from the pay power from pain ability army-wide. You have to spend tokens to give it to specific units. But like, don't get me wrong, full hit rerolls is absolutely amazing, but you have to spend a resource on it now. Whereas before, you got some slightly, maybe not as powerful bonuses, like you'd get the 6-up invuln turn 1, which is like, you know, whatever. But you got that army-wide just because you existed. And now you kind of have, you know, a mini-game of financing your tokens and putting them out where you need them to be. But it could very well also be that, like, you know, Drassar, if he's leading a squad of Incubi, then they get full hit rerolls no matter what. I don't know. Orcs are like 10th edition. I haven't heard about a 10th edition. They just got the wah. So yeah, they still advance and charge, they still get a 5-up invuln, and then they get exploding 6s in melee. That's it. Basically, like, I know they didn't have 6s explode in melee by default, but I think most people played the sub-faction which did have 6s explode in melee. So, despite it being a different edition, they're just kind of the same rule. But they did lose reroll charges army-wide, which is a big thing for the orcs because, yeah, advancing and charging is good. But if you do that turn 1, there's still some distance between you and the opponent, and then you have to roll on the, you know, 8, 9, 10-inch charge, and that becomes significantly harder if you don't reroll your charges, which they don't do anymore. But once again, I feel like a broken record saying this, I just really hope my point gets across. It could be that if, say, orc, what they call the war boss on bike is leading a squad of death copters, or whatever, I don't know how units are going to be led by different characters, but maybe it says like, if this unit is leading this unit, then you can reroll charges if you wah. Then we're moving into like the top of the C tier where I've placed the World Eaters as well as the League of Votann. The World Eaters rolling a lot of dice mechanic and then you can pick different buffs is fairly solid. Some of them you will always be able to get and some of them you'll have to be a little bit lucky. But you can get the advance and charges, you can get, I forgot literally every other buff they can get from the dice except for advance and charge. My point being, the reason I put them in C tier was that while some of the buffs are guaranteed, how many of them you'll have is going to be different from battle round to battle round and from game to game, and therefore it's a bit more swingy, and that's why I put them in the C tier. I generally value having an ability all the time and have it be, you know, just slightly weaker than having to roll a bunch of dice and hope for the best or having to spend, you know, resources on doing things. But that might just be me. That might just be me. And then at the top of the C tier, we have the League of Votann. The Judgment tokens have been completely reworked. Thank fucking God. We've also seen that they are probably a 4+ faction when it comes to shooting and hitting. But I would also imagine that they become significantly cheaper per model than what they are right now. Right now, they are super overpriced per model because their rules are so damn good. But with Judgment tokens now becoming, if you have 1 token, you get +1 to hit against the target, and if they have 2 tokens, you get +1 to hit and +1 to wound. That is still super solid, but we don't know too much about giving out tokens, and so it's not really clear to us yet if, like, every unit on the opponent's army is gonna have 2 tokens, or if it's gonna be like, oh, most units will have 1 token on them, and only a few will have 2 tokens. We don't really have enough information for that now, but +1 to hit and +1 to wound is just kind of like a 16% increase in whatever. And that's pretty solid. That's pretty solid. Alright, we got through the C tier, now moving into the B tier, we have Chaos Knights. And honestly, I put Chaos Knights here because, well, Battle Shock seems to be super important. But Battle Shock is one of those mechanics where I feel like on paper, it sounds really powerful to force opponents to take Battle Shocks and make them worse. But it's also something I feel like I need to play a game with Battle Shock. I need to play a game, roll the dice, see the impact of Battle Shock to like truly get it. But assuming Battle Shock is as important as it seems like it is, then I think the Chaos Knights belong in B tier. Another one where I'm not sure if they should be B tier or maybe even in A tier are the Grey Knights. They have gotten absolutely insane mobility. They can reposition 3 units every single battle round. They automatically advance 6 on every single unit. And it seems like they're going from a 3-up save to a 2-up save. All those things sound great. However, they also lost the Psychic phase. I know it's going to be replaced by different buffs, but a lot of the damage output of Grey Knights taking care of big characters or vehicles came from being able to reliably get, you know, 6 to 12 mortal wounds on something, and that just doesn't really happen anymore. And that's why I put them in the B tier. Also in the B tier are Tyranids, kind of the same thing as the Chaos Knights. If Battle Shock is as important as it seems like it is, then Tyranids are really good because they can not ignore Battle Shock, but they get an extra dice when they roll for Battle Shock. Within Synapse, they can force the entire enemy army to take a Battle Shock test. And then they have some adaptability, like if you're fighting an army with a lot of vehicles, you take one of the adaptations. If they have a lot of characters and you want to snipe those characters out, you take the adaptation with precision hits. But a bit unsure about Tyranids here, they might belong in the C tier. However, I decided to put them in the B tier. And then for our final one, I feel fairly confident in putting these guys in the B tier. Chaos Space Marines. Every single unit can either get sustained hits, which is exploding 6s, or lethal hits, which is 6s to hit auto wound. And yes, you can take some mortal wounds because you need to roll a leadership test, but you're a 6-up army on leadership. You're not going to fail that test that often. And even if you do, I'm fairly certain that getting exploding 6s or lethal hits can kind of upset the amount of wounds you might end up taking from that. And you always have this, and you don't have to use it. Like if you're punching into cultists, or like guardsmen, you don't have to take any of these. You can just punch normally. But I think lethal hits and sustained hits on demand is really powerful. But you know what's better than having lethal hits and sustained hits on demand, but maybe taking some damage? Having sustained hits and lethal hits on demand and not taking any damage at all. Which is what our first A-tier faction, the Adeptus Custodes, can do. Now granted, this is only in the fight phase, whereas Chaos Space Marines can get it in the shooting phase or in the fight phase. but it is just so absolutely amazingly flexible to either get -1 to hit, sustained hits, or lethal hits in the fight phase whenever you want it. You get to choose between it in every fight phase, so if your opponent is a scary melee army, you can switch over to the -1 to hit to help protect your own units. Or if you have a unit with fight first and you want to make sure you finish off something that's just charged into you, because in 10th edition, fight first has the opponent's priority, which means that if I charge something but my opponent has fight first, my opponent gets to fight first despite me charging them. It's just very flexible and will always come in handy. Either you make it easier to kill something with lethal hits, or you get more attacks with sustained hits, or you're more tanky with -1 to hit. Then finally, you have a 4-up, not invulnerable save. Well, you do have a 4-up invulnerable save, but you have a 4-up feel no pain save against mortal wounds, which is really strong on an army consisting of only, a few models compared to so many other armies. Data sheet wise, we've seen that everything have gotten basically either a slight glow up or a side grade. So Custodi's looking strong in my opinion. Then we have the Genestealer cult, which was not announced but revealed just today, their new army and detachment rules. And they are just like, I have no clue where to place these guys. Their army ability reads as being very strong, but there is counterplay. If you're playing against a faction that's really fast, like the Grey Knights, then they can move around like and make your blips disappear. And it's also only a 50% chance to get them into the ambush, whatever it's called, like cold ambush is what I think it's called. Because if you're not battle line, you have to roll a d6, and it's only on a 4+ you get to put them into cold ambush. You don't regenerate your characters either, so if a unit with a character is dead, then that character is gone for sure. But it certainly is a strong ability. I just have a hard time figuring out if it's like A tier or a B tier or even S tier ability. I think there is some recency bias from a lot of people who are like, oh, this is just fucking insane, it's crazy, it's gonna be OP and broken, and it might be, but I think it's also just, yeah, as I said, recency bias, because they just seen these rules. They had no time to think about counters, they've had no time to think about how useful it actually is to keep bringing back, neophytes or acolytes or whatever they're called. So while I totally agree that it seems like a very strong ability, I also think that people might just be like overthinking it, or rather no, not overthinking it, reacting to what they're reading rather than thinking about it. Then we have the Tau Empire, and their army rule is pretty much just get +1 to hit on something, and potentially ignore cover, which is really good for a shooting army. What's mostly holding back my opinion of putting Tau into, like, say, the S tier is that it depends so much on how much their units cost and also their gun profiles. We've seen some of the gun profiles, but we've seen very few in general. I saw someone on another Discord, they made a mystery tier, which is like, they could be D tier, they could be S tier, I don't know. And if I had to put one faction into that, it would probably be Tau. It just, yeah, their army rule seems fine. But it depends more on unit cost and their other guns, which they have a lot of. I decided to place them into A tier. I think they'll be a solid shooting army, but we'll have to wait and see. What I feel fairly confident about putting into the A tier is Imperial Knights. Now, pending that a big knight ends up costing, let's just say 1,000 points, rerolling ones to hit and wound all the time is really good. Having a 6-up feel no pain on toughness at least 10 with, 12, 14 wounds is also really good. And if you can make that a 5-up feel no pain, that's just... I don't even want to think about it. But once again, pending points cost, it might be totally reasonable. Like, if an Armiger ends up costing 250 points or something silly, then, that's not nearly as scary, because there's not going to be as many Imperial Knights on the board. And now, the poster boys. The final defender of the A tier is the Space Marines. Oath of Moment is amazing. It'll be more amazing into some factions than others, but every single faction will have something you'll want to prioritize killing over something else. And Oath of Moment just helps you achieve that so much easier. You want to kill the Big Knight? Put Oath of Moment on the Big Knight. You want to kill a squad of Terminators? Put Oath of Moment on a squad of Terminators. It really doesn't matter what you're playing against, but obviously an army consisting of a few large things and then a bunch of small things might be a stronger matchup for Oath of Moment. Whereas something that's completely horde-based, like let's imagine that Chaos Demons just take, a shit ton of small demons and no greater demons, there's still something you'll want to kill more than other things, but the value might not feel as good. Combat doctrines will always be useful no matter what army build or faction you're playing against. And that's why I think like Space Marines will just be solid. Once again, pending points cost, I think Space Marines are gonna go up in cost compared to what they are in Arcs of Omen right now. But by how much, I can't really tell. I don't think they'll go back to the old levels, but I think everyone can agree that 30 or 35 points for a Terminator with Thunderhammer and Storm Shield, kind of fucking silly. So I think they'll go up in cost on a bunch of units, and we'll just have to wait and see. But the rules are just really solid, so I expect Space Marines to be, well, a solid A-tier army. And then for the no, that's not the word. The creme de la creme, that's the word I was looking for. The S tier. I have 2 factions here. And these are here purely because they get to cheat. They get so many cheat dice, it's not even funny. Eldari starts with 12 cheat dice, and they can reroll them as many times as they want, and then lose 1 dice for each time they reroll them. And yes, somewhere someone is gonna roll 12 ones, and it's gonna be like, well, that's not useful for anything. And then somewhere else, someone's gonna roll 12 sixes, and it's gonna be like, well, I hope you weren't thinking about doing anything for the first 2 battle rounds, because I'm just gonna save everything. And then of course, rerolling 1 hit roll and 1 wound roll every time, also really good. And the same kind of goes for the Sisters of Battle. The amount of miracle dice they will potentially be able to produce, depending on army setup and build and points, is also gonna wildly throw off the game plan of so many armies, because all of a sudden it's like, yeah, well, I guess mathematically I just cannot kill this Exorcist tank because you have 2 5-ups and I only have AP 2 shooting, and I can only deal 15 damage max, but if you just autosave 2 of them, then I can only deal X amount of damage, and it's just like, well, I guess that just doesn't work. And we've seen they get a miracle dice at the start of every battle round, as well as whenever a unit dies. And then there's the Triumph of St. Catherine, where you can turn it into an automatic 6. You get additional miracle dice if your battle sisters are on objectives at the start of your command phase, and yada yada yada. Being able to cheat with dice is really freaking powerful. And then the final thing that makes me put the Sisters of Battle into the S tier is also the fact that they can get fairly easy access to +1 to hit and +1 to wound, simply by losing 1 or 2 models. And you can use the miracle dice for that as well, because ones aren't really as useful for you anymore, because you don't need to take morale tests. Battle shock test is taken on 2 dice. But you can use the ones to automatically fail a save, which might make it so one of your models that is outside of a building dies and now the unit cannot be seen. Or if you're about to fight back after making your saves, you can make sure to kill 1 extra model to get the +1 to hit as well as the +1 to wound. I think that'll be really, really powerful. And yes, that is why both Sisters and Eldar in general are in the S tier. Their rules, detachment ability and army rules are just so damn solid all the freaking time. And they get to cheat with dice, and cheating with dice probably is the most powerful mechanic in the game. Votan kinda had cheating with dice in 9th edition, you know, they cheated by skipping the wound roll, so to speak. Now you might say, well, a lot of factions cheat then, like Custodians get lethal hits. Well, that's on 6s, you know. At a 4+, we start being where it's like you can consistently say you are skipping the wound phase, because it's a 50% chance to skip the phase, not a 16% chance like it is on 6s. But with that is my go through of the tier list for the 10th edition previews. I am aware that there are going to be some Space Marine supplement previews as well. I decided not to include those here because at that point we might also need to discuss like, oh, Astra Militara might have Platoon 1 and Platoon 3 and blah 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 blah. So I've just stuck with like the core factions, and then the supplement factions are something we can talk about at a later point. But yeah, what do you think about my tier list? What would you change yourself? Let me know in the comments below, or head over to my Discord and you can show your own tier list. I'm always interested in hearing why people think something might be good. And then you should also subscribe to the channel, so in 2 months' time when I come back and look at this, I can be like, why would I think that? Why would I think that Grey Knights are a B tier army? They're clearly an S tier army. And we can point and look and have fun at my mistakes. In any case, that's all from me for now. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Until the next time I see you, I hope you have a wonderful time.